sea story.
That's cool.
Hi everyone.
Hi Star.
Hi Star.
He had just
Welcome
lost
to
his wife.
Helicon West.
I had just lost my grandmother that was his age.
Is it on?
I think it's on.
I think you just have to talk about
Is it? Yeah.
I'll try to kiss the mic.
There you go.
I'm Star. I'm your MC for this evening. Thank you for being here. Helicon West is an uncensored public reading series. We regularly host published authors alongside community writers to promote and support all levels of skill, ability, and craft. If you would like to read during the open mic, and tonight is all open mic, so I expect you all to read. Woohoo! Sign up sheet is by the coffee, and remember that we have do we have bookmarks on the table?
I just brought coffee. I don't know.
Okay.
Yep.
We might not have bookmarks on the table, but donate if you want to. Tell me, and I will help you donate. We have a QR code link, but I don't know anything about those things, and so I'll expect all of you to know how to do that. We acknowledge, by the way, and importantly, that Helicon West operates on the territory of the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone Nation. Our events are made possible with support from Sugar House Review, our sugar daddy and sugar mommy, the Logan Library, the USU English Department, and community volunteers like you all are. And thank you, Russ, and thank you, Sean, and thank you, Pam, for handling tonight. Well, it seems like we need 4 of us to take the place of Joseph, who's off doing a family thing tonight. But we're doing it. We're getting it happening. So now for the open mic. Every reader has up to 7 minutes, please. Tell us if you don't want to be recorded, and Sean won't record you, okay? So I'm gonna get the sign-up sheet, and here we go. First on the list, we have Asher Blakely. Then we have Jay Payne, and then Sean Anderson, and we will go to that point, okay? Come on up, Asher.
I have 3 poems tonight. This first one might have been read already. I couldn't remember, but I like it, so I'm going to read it anyway.
Yay.
Good. Intervention, but we don't call it by its name. We call it, I'm worried about you. It's been 3 days since I saw you eat more than a handful of cashews. We call it, you haven't returned my several phone calls, and I don't know if you're even alive out there. We call it, you're cocooned in your nest of blankets, and I miss the shape of your face. We call it famine or feast. You've squirreled away your money and can no longer live. We call it binge and purge. I am so tired of always holding your fragility. We call it, I cannot control you like this, and it makes us both more than a little uncomfortable. We call it, you used to hurt me, but the wound is still weeping, and that may never change. We call it tough love, and you've done nothing to staunch the bleeding. We call it, you stabbed me in the back, but we're pretending to smile for the cameras anyway. We call it moving on because standing in this hurt isn't progress. We call it, I forgive you for breaking me open and rearranging the beating heart of me. Wow. This next one is from the Savvy Writing Workshop, and it's called Tuesday's Panties Were Patterned with Cherries. The girl crosses her little legs to keep him out. His face purple, spittle flying from chapped lips as he calls her names she doesn't know the meanings of. He leaves the room and she relaxes, unclenches her teeth and her fingers. She doesn't mean to lose control of her bladder like a baby. She's a big girl who has chores and responsibilities. He comes back, hunting knife in hand, stares at her sitting in the middle of his bed, a halo of urine spread around her tiny hips. He stomps as he yells. She wonders if this will stop what she knows is coming next, but it doesn't. He drags the back of his blade up her thigh, a sharp tug at her panties, one side then the other, and they flop over useless. He pinches them as he pulls the soggy fabric away, tosses it to the floor. unable to protect her, unable to do anything but hear the frantic beat of her heart in counterpoint to his excited panting. She chokes back small sounds when he spreads her thighs, smothers her scream with a meaty palm crushing her mouth as he pushes into her body. Tears leak from her eyes when it ends. He pulls her carefully into his arms to dump her in the tub, the creak of the tap being turned on and the cold water hitting her skin. He tells her to clean herself quickly so she can deal with the mess she's made of his bed before Mother gets home. Her teeth chatter as she dumps everything into the washer, measures the soap with care and attention, wishes she too could become clean so easily. And then this last one is also from the Savvy Writing Workshop because it just generates stuff. It's called In Search of Closure. I call you plague, an abscess poisoning the system from the inside. Even your memory requires surgical extraction. I call you devastation, a swath of burnt forest, ashes still sifting through sunbeams, infinite and inescapable, a generational ruin. I call you nuclear holocaust, every touch a silent assassination, your name a blister on the tongue. Your victims are forced to break open again and again and again. Wow.
All right, I'll read 2 poems tonight. This first one is an eco poem and a sonnet. It's titled Destruction Story. In this beginning, creatures soft and small float in seas of salt, blooms of algae, plankton tasting sun, and all among those hulking dinosaurs who loomed on land like titans did in ancient tales. Odd, most creation myths involve some strong and cunning giant who is conquered fails so man can rise. Chuckle, the lore's not wrong, but why transfix on giants? Only bones persist, their harmless frames, so their return is all in vain. Yet meanwhile, drilling stones, the rigs unearth an algal muck to burn, or to revive as plastic bags and rings, how they'll rejoin the creatures of the sea. Right. And this next one is based on a near-death experience I had. I was hiking in Logan Canyon and I heard this giant crack. And then I looked around and I realized a giant boulder was coming right towards us. And so I thought it would make a fun poem. So here is Sisyphus's Pieces. Thunder, nebulous, origin, no clouds, over trail, tracing valley, above, hills, paintbrush, sagebrush, boulder burst, broke bits, gravel rock spit, rotundness, second slivered, shard, sharp shatter, I marvel, stone stunned, run until panic settles, silence soften, fist-sized chunks I gather, realize before Sisyphus rolls his boulder back up the mountain, he must collect each piece, recreate all he lost and will lose again.
Wow.
Hi,
Hi, Sean.
hello.
Who's doing these great Savvy workshops?
Listen, I am feeling really lucky that I get to be part of all of this. Savvy workshops are great. Feel free to check them out Wednesdays and Thursdays during the semester, 3 o'clock in the TSC.
Thank you.
Thank you for that shameless plug.
Wow.
Also feeling really lucky, earlier this year I got to be the coordinator at Helicon West, and I was working with Ashley and before Ashley Kyler, and Kyler was obsessed with the speculative nonfiction genre, so I tried it in Kyler's honor, I guess, and this is where we're gonna go, and it's called Speculative Suicide. I killed myself at 22, November 14th, 2014. The day before my dad's birthday, I left the shoebox 2-bedroom apartment that I shared with 3 other men, climbed into the driver's seat of my 2004 Honda Civic, and drove myself up Logan Canyon, praying that when the full force of me, multiplied by the full force of my Civic, crashed into the guardrail, we would punch through, tumbling end over end to the ice-cold Logan River below. In speculative nonfiction, I'm allowed to bend the rules of genre, or rather, I'm drawing new rules, creating a new genre, because genre has really always been nothing more than an agreement between writer and reader. In speculative nonfiction, I can die. I can change the path I took, not out to paradise, but east and north toward Garden City, where I am more likely to die, where I can sprinkle in details like the aspens, leafless and naked in the fall. I can have a near miss with a deer. I can note the confinements of a narrow 2-lane road barely carved out on the thin stretch of land that borders the eternally carving river. Speculative nonfiction is a lie. It's fiction. We might as well call it fiction, but we lose the vulnerability when we move into fiction. Fiction rarely asks what if, or rather it rarely asks the reader to ponder what if. Fiction in so many circles has grown synonymous with entertainment. If my protagonist, let's even name him Sean, got in his Civic and drove off the mountainside to fall to his death at 22, we'd have a story. The story would demand a reason why, and a good work of fiction would give us the why. Edna Pontellier swims out beyond her strength at the end of Kate Chopin's The Awakening, and her readers understand that Edna had to swim out that far. Her feminist sensibilities could not survive in her society, but she was a human creature starved for community and connection. Dorian Gray slashes the painting that makes him immortal, because he cannot live with the testament of his hideous sins. Protagonists die, and the reader has to know the reason why. Nonfiction, too, encourages the why. It's the navel-gazing need humanity has to self-reflect, to look back on the painful, the ugly, the beautiful, the haunting, and piece together why we are haunted by moments. But in speculative nonfiction, we push beyond the reasons why. I would climb into the Civic, and we push past all the need to understand why, so we can land on a monumental decision and create an alternate world where we step into these what-ifs. A friend of mine wrote a speculative nonfiction essay where he is split into two: his straight passing self, who is loved by his family and who excels in church, and his gay self, who grew up on the other side of a closet door that constantly followed the straight passing self everywhere he went. He asks, what if my gay self was a separate person? And he answers the question, showing a younger version of himself, opening the closet door and embracing the gay self. What if my gay self were separate? I'd never have swum in the shame, and I could have loved that piece of me easier. It is easier for this friend to send love outward rather than inward. What if, as my car reached the light where 6th East meets 4th North, I had turned left instead of right? I'd find myself in a canyon, not in the valley. I'd drive faster speeds. I'd be in deeper darkness. The nonfiction essay of this event has been written very, very poorly, but it's written. I turn right, I turn left onto Main Street, I drive through Providence, Nibley, Hiram, Paradise. I find myself south of Paradise. I relish the metaphor. My storytelling mind leaps on it, convinces me that I have to stay alive, have to write down the metaphor that I boldly assume no one before me has ever thought of. I turn around, drive home, dry my eyes, write a poem, write an essay, let my depression out on the page. The speculative essay could start at any moment, but it starts when I turn onto 4th, left, not right, canyon, not valley, darkness, not city lights. But here we can diverge again, stars, not light pollution. And the answer to what if might change. Instead of focusing on darkness and letting that darkness spread internally, I could look up, see the Milky Way, could sit still and let the waves of depression wash over me, wash past. Because ultimately, what if has to land on the question, why not? What if my what ifs become more beautiful than the reality of the true nonfiction? Why couldn't my friend love himself earlier? Why not embrace his sexuality younger? Why not drive into the canyon, see the stars, hurtle over the edge? Thank you.
Wow. These are really good. People are missing out by I wish everyone in the world was here. Well, maybe not every single one. I'm really glad that you're all here tonight. Our next reader is Denise. Then we are having Ashley. Wait, you're not on the list. That was wishful thinking. You think about it, okay? I don't have my glasses on. Here. Denise is next, and then Tim. And then I will read something while Ashley decides what she's going to read. And then I'll call on some more people to read. Okay. Denise.
always good teacher. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a couple of poems. I was going to read 3 and I haven't decided which one. Okay, well, I'm going to start. Recently, I had the great honor to teach in Czech Republic for 2 weeks, which is I've done a couple times before. And before I went, I was reading a book called Prague Winter, which was about Czech Republic, written by Madeleine Albright. It's an amazing book about World War II. And while I was there, I really felt history in a way that I've never done before. So this is a poem called Golden Touch. Golden Touch. Each morning during my travels, I would wake and remain still a while, lingering in the dark quiet, feeling the unknown day stretched out beyond the horizon of my knowing. Nothing familiar to let awareness rest on. Nothing familiar to touch with relief. Only awe and respect for the vast uncertainty. Later, I wandered down streets that have been walked upon by millions of shoes, whose owners' faces I would not recognize, whose hearts were filled with worry or wonder. I roamed roads whose stones had shattered and trembled under the tonnage of tanks. I passed venerable tree veterans whose scarred branches still hold the ghosts of memories. The shroud of history spread over it all, heavy and tired and defeated, until the light arrived and reached into the darkness, lifting the worn edges with tender fingers, spreading its radiant palm across walls, down roofs, filling cracks and crevices with glimpses of gold, reconstructing that city into a place of possibilities, as it has every morning for centuries, as it will for countless more to come. Okay. This one really happened recently. I cried at the grocery store. This is called Sitting Together. Yesterday I cried in the produce section of the grocery store. I felt my worn heart rip, then split, as I held 2 of the most gorgeous oranges I have ever seen. Their radiance glowed brightly in my hands, while across the planet, another one's hands are empty and dark. I struggled to restrain the sobs that pushed up the tear, ripping it wider, while across the planet, another one strains to mend the ragged fabric of their heart. Around me, neighbors shopped for the feast that they would lay across their table, thankful for the abundance of their lives. While across the planet, others wandered in search of any small source of food that would sustain them through another desperate day. Gathering my basket, I walked out of the market into the brilliant upside-down blue bowl of afternoon. Tears fell onto my shoes and onto the pavement. In the car, I sat weeping with grief so big it reached across the planet from some other person who also sits and weeps. I reached back with long thought fingers of love because it was all I could do in those tender aching moments sitting together with grief and love. Okay. Oh. Okay. Which one? 1 or 2, you decide. 1 or 2? 2. Okay. It's called How to Begin. This is how we can begin. Choose a person you do not know. It could be anybody. The grocery store bag boy gathering carts in the parking lot, or perhaps a student walking down the hallway just outside your door, or the UPS man. Start with a small kindness, nothing grand or big. Hold the door open, smile as they look up and meet your eyes. Still smile even if they don't smile back, but rather look down or away. Hold them in your memory as they pass. Wish them well. And then wish yourself well. You will not know how your kindness will land into another's day, into their life, how it may or may not make a difference. But you will know how it touches yours, softening the edges, widening perspective, bringing you back home again and again to your own tender being.
Hello, everyone.
Hi,
I'm sorry I have to use glasses.
No.
We're waiting for the book.
We all know that. Some of us.
So I was having dinner with a friend, several friends last night, and we tried to get one to come here to Helicon West week, and she was too afraid, so she didn't. And I was giving her all sorts of advice, and I think maybe I'll try and take some. The first thing is, when you have stage fright, it never goes away. I don't care what anyone says. You get up here, you look out across the audience, and it's like, oh, good thing I've got my book, because I don't know anything. Then you open it up and you start to read, and for the first paragraph or so, you should ignore the audience until you get into the rhythm of your piece, and then once you've done that, you can look up and pray to God you don't lose your place as you're doing that. And by the time you're done, it was a really positive experience, and now we're going to see if I lied. Because I was making the whole thing up. They're trying to get her here. So, anyway, just as a matter of introduction, well, there's another thing. Always introduce something so you don't dive into your book and screw up. I wrote a Christmas story. Christmas essay, I should say, a couple, 3 years ago, and I liked it, and it ended up getting published, so here you go, Reflections by, well, I don't think I've ever experienced the magic of Christmas, not the kind so prevalent in the tales of the season anyway. No geriatric ghosts in chains to cajole me into changing my rigid ways, no Christmas angels, talking snowmen, or incandescent ungulates, nor even so much as a flake of miracle snow. It's not that I have a problem with Christmas, it's my favorite of holidays. I love the decorations, except for those 20-foot label things, they're just creepy. I love the music, and I consider myself conscientious about finding just the right gift. I enjoy the food, and of course the spirituality of the season is something special, but for most, I think, it's far from the mass market ideal. My own spiritual epiphanies are of a much more personal nature. Christmas is remembered as much for departures from tradition as the traditions themselves. As a kid, I was more concerned with catching Santa than sitting on his lap. Not catching him like some kindergarten version of Mythbusters, but as a part of an elaborate gift, or as part of an elaborate gift heist. I wanted Santa to be real. I wanted to be his friend. I'd creep up the stairs like a prepubescent ninja, avoiding all the creaky floorboards like landmines, to await his arrival. Alas, due to the tireless efforts of my geriatric ninja grandmother, Santa remained free. Then came the year that my grandmother died. Christmas found the family sharing memories of her as we struggled to prepare for her funeral, and then again for our first Christmas without her. It was like spending Christmas with Grandma one last time. My heart still swells at the memory of a boarding school Christmas, my first away from home, where a dozen abandoned and unruly boys became family, only for the day. And the holiday spent with family of choice, like my boyfriend and I exchanged gifts in a freezing hotel room, having been barred from our homes, or Christmas Eve fireworks over tropical ocean, as Jay and I cuddled each other under the blanket in the 60-degree night. Then there was the year all the nostalgia about being home for Christmas finally made sense as I raced home across the continent, along the great intertwining web of American interstate, counting on divine intervention to keep me from being pulled over, or at least Christian charity to protect me from speeding tickets, and it worked, twice. Somewhere in the frozen desert of Wyoming, my car shuddering in the icy crosswind, a sense of exhaustion born not only from the strain of 2,000 miles traversed, but also the anticipation of how far I had yet to go set in. I began to see lights in the sky and pulled into something which, had it been summer, would laughingly have passed for a rest area. I got out and crunched through the thigh-high snow to a picnic table and spent what seemed like hours shivering in fascination at my first ever view of the Aurora Borealis. It was as though I could feel the energy radiating through my very core. My communion interrupted only by a peevish highway patrolman ordering me to move on before I froze to death. They aren't all Hallmark moments, though. Among other things I've done for Christmas, including bouncing and tending bar multiple times. The tips on Christmas are great. I've also been snowed in with an Iranian cabbie, gone to the movies, eaten at McDonald's, and of course Denny's, alone. I ate Christmas dinner at a convenience store once, just outside of Dallas. There I witnessed a stunning demonstration of kindness when a trucker, upon hearing an obviously affluent woman's response to a homeless man's request for change, he'd only spent it on booze, invited the man inside and treated everyone there to a new burrito Christmas. When our holiday feast was done, we sent the man on his way with a bottle of Lord Calvert, a marathon candy bar, and what cash each of us could spare. These and far too many similar years taught me that while many of us celebrate Christmas in earnest, others can only endure it. The widowed, deployed, estranged, relocated, incarcerated, and perhaps most difficult of all, the poor. Not to mention the religious refugees, the Jews, the Muslims, atheists, Buddhists, Hindus. For many, the words Merry Christmas can feel like the holiday equivalent of let them eat cake. Each year I'm reminded that Christmas is more than gathering to, preparation for, and lack of enjoyment, or lack enjoyment or lack thereof, the family feast. More than giving or receiving the perfect gift, often is not pretending the gift is perfect, more even than a strictly ecumenical celebration of Christ's birth. Christmas for me is reflection, and I don't think anymore about the magic or tradition of how many presents I've been lucky enough to unwrap. Rather, I think about the people I've met, the adventures we've shared, and I wish them all the very best. In the words of O Little Town of Bethlehem composer Philip Brooks, the world has grown weary through the years, but at Christmas it is young. Oh, I forgot to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Star.
And now,
Star.
okay. Actually, I've read that piece a few times, and I think I like it better. At least I always still like it. I'm gonna have to pull that book out again and reread everybody's. It's a nice book. This is a short memoir piece called Body Envy. I was going to read the one about my name, but it didn't quite revise the way I thought it might. So it's not quite ready. But I think this one's pretty close. Now, this is a piece that I wrote in Sean's front room, and the prompt is, wake up in someone else's body. How would your life change? What's the first thing you would do? I was jealous of Cher's rib removal surgery. She had the bottom ones taken out so her waistline would be longer, more slender, her hip bones further away from her ribs, so she had a long, lean hourglass figure. Not like the old-time hourglass figures with big soft hips and lush matronly bosom, no. Cher was slender all the way from her face to her sandaled toes. I envied Cher's clothes. She wore tight little tops and bustiers, a belt that was wide and sashy with fringe on its ties. She wore skinny at the thighs, flaring to wide at the feet bell bottoms to accentuate her live thighs and sexy toes with toenails curved and lacquered. I wanted sexy toes. I wanted her hair dark and sleek and shining all the way down to the fringe on her belt. I wanted Cher's eyes, oh my God, her almond eyes, lined in black 60s cat mask perfection. Her eyelids big and sleepy like Garbo's, brushed with three-toned eyeshadow, thick eyelashes top and bottom, never clumped or smeared, the best money could buy, and her dark eyebrows sculpted like bird wings. I was envious of Cher's husky voice, though I knew it could never be mine or anyone else's. My voice was fine. It was good. I had a good singing voice. I was the fill-in part for whoever needed someone in their section of the church choir. My sister was the chorister. She was 20 years older than I was. She told me she liked my voice because it was sturdy and clear and versatile. This was the only compliment my sister ever gave me that I felt was sincere. The other times she pretended, like when she told me I looked better without makeup. Why would I paint my face like that? It looked cheap and trashy. Or when she told me I should wear more modest clothing, my body too filled out for low necklines and short skirts, so I looked slutty. Why would you advertise yourself like that? It was her own fault that I was all filled out. After she stole me from our mother when I was barely 13 and hid me away in her house with nothing to do but eat, and she cooked all the most fattening temptations, fresh baked rolls bread, beef stew with fat dripping from the beef chunks, warm tapioca pudding after school, and cakes. German chocolate cake with butter coconut caramel frosting, cherry nut cake with buttercream frosting, marble cake with chocolate fudge frosting. She knew my weaknesses. They were her sustenance. She liked her mashed potatoes and gravy physique. She was the Marilyn Monroe body type, big breasts, big hips and thighs, big soft upper arms. I was the Cher and Twiggy generation, twig thin and starved looking. I aspired to the kind of body you could hang any style on and it would look model right, runway perfect. All you'd have to do is pick up a microphone and put your lush lips to it and sing, I got you, babe. I got you, babe, I'd think to myself. I know you're inside my short, blunt frame with the chewed nails and the big feet, the straw-like peroxided hair, the too small eyes, the no eyelashes, no eyebrows, chubby, too chubby face. I figured I'd never find all the money for all the surgery it would take me to make me look like Cher. I figured I could sew my own bell-bottoms and crop tops if I could get out from under my big sister's thumb. But I knew I would never be a famous singer, even if my voice was better than Cher's. It would never be husky and sexy and popular. I would never be popular. I didn't have the body or the willpower or the will to get away from what I thought was holding me down. Later, I grew up. Though I'm not saying I grew out of envying Cher, of admiring Cher, she's still my idol, my wish, even in our 70s. And now, who else is reading? Ashley, did you?
Yeah, I can read
Okay, and then Pam, and then after Ashley and Pam, I need a third one, and then Russ. Okay. Thank you, Ashley.
You're welcome.
Woo-hoo.
Okay, since I've been voluntold.
That's a great phrase. Oh, I like that.
So in my fiction writing class this semester, it was about incorporating research into our fiction. And earlier this semester, my friend Maddie and I we went to the Grand Canyon. We went to Havasu Pai. And so I was just interested in the Grand Canyon at the time that I started the story. So it's kind of based on the Great Unconformity is what it's called, if you've heard of it. But basically it's, if you look at like a geologic record, like if you go really deep and look at a wall of rock, there's a big chunk of time that's missing. And it's been like a mystery forever, basically. And there's theories about what kind of eroded that away, that portion, but that's what this is inspired by. So it's called the Great Unconformity. And I'll just read the beginning of it. 1.3 billion years, she tells her students. It's a length of time impossible for the human mind to comprehend. For reference, the Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. If you were to save $100 a day, it would still take you 35,616 years to save $1.3 billion. If you were to walk 1.3 billion steps with an average human stride of 2 feet, you could circle the equator nearly 20 times. She tells them this so they will understand the importance of what she tells them next. 1.3 billion years, that is the amount of time missing from the geologic record. She moves to the next slide and shows them a picture of a man at the Grand Canyon resting his hand on the geologic mystery, the Great Unconformity. A sun hat covers much of his face, making it difficult to parse his emotions, but she imagines that his eyes are wide with awe. It's a feeling to which she can relate. On the bottom of the canyon wall, the rock is a molten gray with organic, quasi-vertical lines that tilt and curve one way and then the other, indecisive and ever-shifting. Another distinctly different layer of rock sits above, this one a brighter hue of orange, streaked with vertical lines and peppered with some of the oldest fossils known to man. The first layer, she explains, near the man's thumb is 1.8 billion year old Vishnu basement rock. And just above that, near his little finger, is a Cambrian strata, only 500 million years old. So the question is, what happened to everything in between? It's a question that geologists have puzzled over for decades, and one that she only allows herself to ask in the context of rocks. She does not, for example, allow herself to consider the in-betweens of her own life. She fancies herself one of those weight loss infomercials, just the before and after photos jammed together with nothing in the middle. The human lifespan, she has decided, is too small, terrifying in its intimacy. The lifespan of a rock is far preferable. It offers distance and perspective where humanity only offers confusion and grief. After class, she collects her things, carefully swabbing each item with a wet wipe. She pours a generous amount of hand sanitizer into the palm of her right hand and spreads it between her fingers, up her forearms, and around her mouth and nose. The ethanol burns her eyes, a sensation that she's been craving since before class started. And she can feel her toes uncurl in her sneakers, releasing the captive fabric of her socks. She usually tries to avoid disinfecting in front of her students because it feels too vulnerable. Graduate student instructors don't have the luxury of age to set them apart from those they teach, so she relies on clandestinity. She pulls a tissue from her pocket and turns off the light switch, careful not to make contact with the plastic. The lecture hall is small, and it feels much more welcoming now without the annoying buzz of fluorescence. On one side of the room, the wall is plated in a rich ebony paneling. On the other, a line of old iron wrought windows let in the brief flashes of sunlight that slip through an otherwise oppressive layer of English ivy. As she opens the door to leave, tissue carefully placed over doorknob, her eyes graze the poster taped above the light switch that reads, "What are your plans?" The poster is intended for undergraduates, advertising a degree exploration fair, but she can't help but feel personally attacked. What are her plans? With 8 measly months till graduation, this is something she ponders quite often, and with no small degree of panic. If you had asked about her plans 4 years ago, the answer would have been simple. She planned to become a field researcher, discover new fossils on a weekly basis, solve the mystery of the Great Unconformity by the age of 30, and spend all of her free time giving TED Talks and polishing her Listen medallion. Simple. Except that it isn't so simple anymore. These days, the only thing that she's discovering are new fears that follow her around and nip at her ankles like puppies. As she begins the trek to the parking lot, she attempts to quiet her busy thoughts by humming the melody of her mother's favorite song. The sky has already begun to melt into the liminal blue of dusk, and she tries to spot the moon, but is disappointed to only find street lamp after street lamp. Once in her car, she rests her chin against the steering wheel and gazes out at the overlook of the valley. The snow on the mountains has mostly melted now, and the base of the range has begun to ripen with foliage. Higher up, the sheer, craggy peaks pierce the sky like arrows. The rocks are tens of millions of years old, relics of another time. She feels a yearning, something akin to love, but cringes at the thought. What kind of loser feels love for rocks? And besides, what is love if only at a distance, from behind the windshield of a sanitized, climate-controlled Mazda 6? For a moment, she considers driving to the mountains, scouring the hiking trails for horn coral or collecting rock samples like she had done so many times as an undergraduate. But then she thinks of the endoliths, colonies of bacteria and fungi that inhabit the pores of rocks. Before the thought can reach her consciousness, she is pushing her sleeves to her elbows and scanning her forearms for signs of rashes. It's not logical, she knows. There's no way she could have cyanotoxin poisoning, but she checks anyway, better not to risk it. With forearms thoroughly scoured, she huffs and drops her hands back into her lap. What kind of masochist dedicates their whole life to something they fear? She wonders. Just slap a mustache on me and call me Salvador Dali. That's the beginning.
Hi, I'm Pam. I have a Christmas story from 1990.
All right.
It was Christmas Eve. We had already gone caroling through the neighborhood. We were kind of poor. What we gave the neighbors were homemade decorated Christmas cookies that my daughters and I had made. And they enjoyed this. They didn't know we were poor. They didn't know this was the cheapest thing we could afford to do for our neighbors. We'd had dinner, we'd done caroling, we were home. They had their nightgowns on, and I asked them to feed the dog. The dog store was just off of the kitchen in the back porch, and that back porch faced our neighbors to the east. When they went out to feed the dog, they came running back in. Their eyes were huge. Our daughters were 3 and 6. Santa Claus is right next door at the Jepson house, they said. We've got to get to bed. We've got to get to bed now. If Santa Claus comes to our house next and we're not asleep, he won't leave anything. I said, okay, I'll run up to bed. I played along with them. They ran up to bed, and my daughter called me to come up and read them a book. When I got upstairs, she handed me a book and said, Mom, this is the shortest book we own. Read really fast. So I did. It wasn't even 7 o'clock at night. So I played along with them, knowing that pretty soon I would hear the pitter-patter of little feet coming down the stairs. I turned on the TV, and there was a Christmas movie. So I watched this Christmas movie and wrapped a few last gifts, just waiting for the girls to come down. I knew the Jepsons had a family party every Christmas Eve. Their kids, most of them were grown and married, and they would come back home on Christmas Eve. That's why we went caroling earlier, so that we were home, and they would have their Christmas party, and Santa Claus always came. My girls slept the whole night until 7 in the morning. I got all kinds of stuff done. I got a good sleep. It was a perfect Christmas. I just loved it. A few days later, I shared this story with Mrs. Jepson and said, my girls just happened to see Santa Claus as he was going to your house. And I told her how they went to bed so early, and we both got a laugh out of it. That was 1990. The next year, we were caroling, we were taking cookies to neighbors, and I was chatting with some of the Jepson kids that I only saw maybe once or twice a year. The Jepsons were old enough, a little older than my parents, and their kids were close to my age, so their grandkids were my children's age. And I was visiting with them, but trying to keep track of the time, and when you know it, I heard the jingle bells of Santa coming through the door. I looked at Alice, and we locked eyes, and I said, I've got to get out of here. And she said, no, stay a minute. And I thought, what are you thinking? We've got to get out. Let's go through a side door or something so the kids are saved from this tragic. I could just imagine how south it would go. And she said, no, just stay a minute. Santa Claus came in, all the grandkids were so excited to see him. He sat down in the middle of the room and he started calling out grandkids' names. And he called out a couple of names, and I was just sweating and nervous and not knowing what to do. And then he called out my daughter's name. And I know the grandkids' names of the Jepson family, and they don't have a Corey. And he called out Corey. And Mrs. Jepson said to my Corey, go get a gift from Santa. And she walked up there, and he handed her a gift. She opened it and loved it. And I was just, you could have knocked me over. He called a few more names, and then he called Hallie. And my daughter Hallie has been called Haley and Holly and everything but Hallie. But he pronounced her name right. And when she came up, he said, how are you, Hallie? How has your year been? You know, just a little Santa chat back and forth. And Hallie got a gift and opened it and loved it. And I was still just flabbergasted as we walked just a few short yards back to our house. I could not believe it. How did she know we were going to be there? This is their family. They don't invite neighbors. They don't invite others. They have a big enough family on their own. And so a few days after Christmas, I talked to Mrs. Jepson myself, and I said, how did you know we were going to be there? How did you arrange that? I mean, I know there's magic at Christmas, but come on. And she said, I didn't know you were going to be there. If you weren't there, I was going to have Santa come to your house. And I just thought, this is the real magic of Christmas. I can't tell this story 33 years later without getting emotional. It's just a magical Christmas story. I am still friends with Mrs. Gibson. She's 93 now, and I'm still friends with her kids. And though we haven't lived as neighbors, I still send Christmas cards, I still visit her. And I will remember and cherish that story as my children will for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Hello. Hi. I don't remember the last time I read here. I missed that. I'm gonna read the last thing I wrote that I kind of like. I wrote it quite a while ago, but it's about my dad died about a year ago, a little over a year ago, and I wrote this the summer before he died, and it's kind of about that and about other things too. And I'm sorry, it's about fishing as well, which I feel.
Really?
I know it's not. It's not. I need to break out and do something else. But it's called "On Fly Boxes: Perfect Streams and Dying Fathers." My fly box used to look like it was packed by a drunk toddler. Dries mixed with wets, mixed with nymphs, mixed with bass flies, mixed with bear hooks. I prefer compartment fly boxes, mostly because I think they hide things well. I'd cautiously unlatch a window and it would pop open like a gag snake flying out of a novelty can of peanuts. Flies would stumble into the water or onto the ground, and I'd see what flies had been, which flies had been cohabitating. I've been tying almost as long as I've been fishing, and in my fly box, my early flies with dried globs of glue and garnish and garish flash winding off of them were always kept right next to my tight, new, almost perfect flies. For years, I used my whip finisher wrong. It's a thing that ties a knot on a fly. And my flies would eventually unravel like a spent spring. I always thought that I would salvage the hooks from such flies. Instead, they have clanked around in my box. I never really got hook sizes and shapes right, so I would tie an Adams on a nymph hook and a pheasant tail on a dry hook. Once I tied with a buddy, Chad, who most of you know, and he said, "You just kind of play jazz when you tie flies, don't you, Beck? You don't need a pattern." I know he meant it as a compliment, but to me it underscored that I was hapless. I never cared because the fish never saw the inside of my fly box and seemed to still bite my mangled flies. Something changed when I turned 40. I became convinced that I needed to be better organized in both my fly box and my life. Maybe the fish could see inside the fly box. I bought a fancy small fly box and decided that I would fill it with multiples of my most used nymphs. Nymphs are the ones that go under the water. Now I have 2 perfect rows of size 18 zebra midges in 4 different colors, a row of slightly varied caddis larvae imitations, a combination of 3 patterns that I kind of made up that work well for me. I've got a row of pheasant tails, some with flash and bead heads, some without. And then I have some other rows that I can't talk about for one reason or another. The idea was to have each row dedicated to one type of fly, and when I lost one, I would replace it with a newly tied fly. I would always have the same number of flies in the box, and it would always stay perfectly symmetrical. All the zebras would wind the same way, all the pheasant tails would swoop the same way, everything would stay perfect and clean and orderly like a spreadsheet. So far, it mostly has worked. It's broken down since then. It doesn't work at all anymore. I'm a few flies behind, but it still looks predictable. 3 or 4 times a year, I fish a stream that's right by a campground. I try to go on the extreme shoulder seasons, even hiking through snow occasionally to get there, so that I won't encounter folk on camp chairs throwing worms. The campground hugs the mountainside, and the stream nearly springs out of the said mountain right into the campground, about 200 yards out. The stream meets a meadow. It weaves in on itself, it clusters and spreads thin, then gathers again to form the river that carves a canyon. From above, the waterway looks like a diorama of a nervous system, with the brain at the top of the valley and the small tributaries of braided brooks dispersing through the meadows, reaching the body's extremities. And like a diorama, everything looks smaller and exaggerated. The meadow flowers, the deer, the stream itself. Sometimes the stream nearly doubles back on itself to form sweeping S-turns. There are flats and ponds and riffles and cut banks. There's so much variance in about a half a mile of river that it's always challenging and fun and full of eager fish, small brookies and slightly larger rainbows, and very occasionally decent cutbows. All rivers change all the time, but that section is drastically different every year. It feels like the beavers are holding a how-to clinic for other beavers, and they have about 1.5 acres for class projects. Its perfections is in its changes, especially the small changes. Sometimes the cut bank will switch sides of the river. Sometimes the school of fish that I depend on will move upstream or downstream 15 feet. Sometimes banks break and an S becomes an L. My dad has been dying since I was born, but right now he seems really serious about it. He's always been frail, but now his mind is caught up. He asks me the same questions repeatedly. Sometimes he asks me things that I'm alarmed he doesn't have in his ready access memory. Things like, what do you teach? I teach writing, and I have for 15 years. What grade do you teach? I teach at a university and have my entire career. Where do you live these days? Logan, Utah, and I have for almost 20 years. But he remembers things like my name, my wife's name, my daughter's name, and even my dog's name. This mental slip has been particularly hard to take. As a kid, I always knew I had no case. When other kids in grade school bragged to each other about their father's physical prowess, but I knew that my dad was the smartest. Probably they could combine all those boys' dads' wits and it wouldn't measure up to dad. That's almost all gone. Where there was an S, now there's a deep dug canal without any cut banks. A straight efficient line that moves sediment from one place to another. There's no longer unpredictable jokes or stories, just the same questions over and over again. Dad lives about 4 hours away and I go down when I can. I mostly come away feeling worse, but I keep going. Every trip, Dad will have 1 or 2 slips into lucidity. He'll make a half joke. He'll have a look of understanding. He'll tell my mother that he loves her. The stream breaks the bank and rushes over parched ground, but just for a second or two. Dad was a chemist and a professor, and by all accounts good at both jobs. The periodic table that hung in our garage/lab looked like the perfect compartment fly box with everything in the right place. In its sleep now, Mom says that Dad tries to solve equations. He balances molecules that don't exist, and sometimes he'll wake up with a start, probably because the numbers that he can't remember anymore won't add up. Maybe the compartments that separate his mental periodic table became porous. Atomic numbers bleed into each other, making unholy, imperfect, impossible molecules. In his dreams, he's tying dry flies on nymph hooks. I can't think of anything that would be worse for my dad to dream about. I hope his rigid brain can find its way back to the life he lived before he was a professor and a chemist. Dad stares through clouded eyes and his back window at mountains all day, at his mountains. During the summer of his youth, Dad moved herds of sheep up there from one perfect valley to another with a collie and sheer will. I like to imagine a youthful dad who could still ride a horse. I can see, and I hope he can somehow too, one great crane shot from above looking down on that life like a diorama, miniaturized and exaggerated. Thanks. Sorry, I was a bummer. I didn't do that. I apologize.
Hey, no apology of that.
I usually read funny things, so that was harder.
That was great. I was the only one who could read anything funny tonight. Everything else was good. Okay, anyone else? Good. What's your name?
I'm Morgan.
Morgan, come on up. Yay!
This is kind of a work in progress,
Alright.
but it's about what I've observed at my apartment the last couple of years. A couple of barn swallows made a nest in my apartment building. Each day a little mud and some twigs until Half-Cone sat atop the wire cage protecting the emergency sprinkler. Lined with grass and her own soft down, the female sat in the nest, a little plumper than before. I'm told barn swallows mate for life. Her partner perched atop the bare sprinkler cage next to hers, guarding the nest, but they were no match for the tools and sheer size of the human maintenance crew. Feathers, twigs, broken clods of dry dirt line the walkway below the sprinkler now, and the two small birds begin again with new twigs, new mud. Thankfully, there are no broken eggs among the wreckage of the first nest. A month goes by, and she is still sitting in her nest, the second one completed as quickly as the first. She sits in the nest day and night, only flying away briefly when someone walks by on their way to or from home. Her partner stands guard with her. I'm told barn swallows lay multiple eggs at a time. When they are away from the nest, we look at the nest through the camera on a scope and see only one cream-colored egg, laid a week too late, but cared for all the same. I watch the nest every day, hoping to catch a glimpse of the young bird that should have been. Last year, the swallows' nests were destroyed after they laid the eggs. Mangled proto-limbs and goo and shells mixed among the mud and twigs scattered below the sprinkler cages. I'm told barn swallow eggs incubate for 2 to 3 weeks, and I eagerly count down the days from the time their second nest was completed. I wait another week, and then another just to be safe. The swallows abandon their nest, and I replace my anticipation with mourning. I hope the swallows make a nest again somewhere else. I'm told barn swallows lay eggs multiple times during the year, but I never saw them again.
Thanks. Okay, that must be it. I want to thank you all for reading. This has been just an exceptional night. Really good pieces, so thank you. And I want to tell you that no, the library is not done, and it won't be done in January, but we're having Helicon West not here, but over in the Logan City office community room. And it's a really nice room. I've been in there doing events before. And in fact, we had one of our Helicon West birthday parties in there. And tonight we're really celebrating, what, the 18-year birthday party of Helicon West. So thank you for coming out and helping us celebrate. And I want to tell you what's coming up next in the community room, okay? January 11th, Charles Waugh is reading. January 25th, Brock DeChair is doing a generative writing presentation and prompt. And Helicon West is now run by all of the community people who love Helicon West. So everybody volunteered, and every single Helicon West for all of next year is, well, I'm sorry, not fall, but spring through summer is covered. Everybody knows what we're going to do. Thank you, thank you, thank you, community. Woo! And thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful night and good holidays, and see you in the new year.